In the top of the news this morning, Ronald Reagan, Walter Mondale, and an estimated 95 million other Americans are going to the polls today to exercise their right to vote.
A new ABC News Washington Post poll shows President Reagan holding on to his substantial lead over Walter Mondale this morning. And this morning, the hijacking of a Saudi airliner in Tehran has ended with the passengers released, the hijackers arrested.
From ABC News, this is World News This Morning for Tuesday, Election Day, November 6th, 1984. It's 6:30 a.m. Now from our Washington news desk, Steve Bell and Kathleen Sullivan.
Good morning, everyone. Both presidential candidates are home now, waiting for voters to make their decision. President Reagan's voting today near his Santa Barbara ranch in California. Walter Mondale is casting his ballot in North Oaks, Minnesota. A final ABC News Washington Post poll shows President Reagan holding fast to that 54-40 lead, the same margin as yesterday's poll. As Mike Von Fremd reports, the president wound up his campaign yesterday where his political career started.
The First Lady celebrated the end of the campaign by bowling in orange down the aisle of Air Force One. Today, the first family votes, watches election returns with friends, and after the polls close in California, hopes to declare victory. As he campaigned yesterday, the president's pollsters gave him some encouraging numbers. They told him that even by conservative estimates, his victory margin should be at least 10 points, and he should easily win 46 states. But publicly, the president continued to be cautious.
I want to say, I'm terrified by the polls. Please don't read them anymore. Don't get complacent. Tomorrow.
But by the end of the day, when he arrived in San Diego for the very last rally of the campaign, the president sounded a bit more optimistic.
It's great to be in San Diego, my good luck city.
The reason why the president said that is because he closed out his 1980 campaign at the exact same spot and celebrated the election results at this very hotel, where construction for a victory bash tonight is still now underway. But Ronald Reagan candidly admits he is superstitious, and so that's why he's ending his 1984 campaign in the exact same fashion as 1980, hoping for the same results. Steve?
Mike, what about the coattail effect? Is the president going to be able to bring along the Congress?
Well, Steve, in the House, they are counting on substantial coattails from President Reagan, winning back most of the 26 seats that were lost in 1982 and reestablishing that so-called ideological working majority. But in the Senate, it's pretty much a wash. They think that Republican Helms will win in North Carolina, that Percy's a toss-up in Illinois, and Jepsen probably won't survive in Iowa. But for the president, there's now talk of capturing 57 to 61% of the vote. And if Mr. Reagan goes above 61%, he'll set a record exceeding that of Lyndon Johnson over Barry Goldwater 20 years ago today. Steve?
Thank you very much, Mike. Kathleen?
And now the challenger, Walter Mondale. Walter Mondale flew from California to Iowa to Minnesota on the final day of the presidential campaign. Throughout the day, Mondale made a final plea to voters to help him score the biggest upset in American history.
This country belongs to you, and you're going to take it back. Give me your help. Let's make history. Let's build our future. Let's win this election. It's time for new leadership. It's time for America to move on. Thank you very, very much.
Betsy Aaron, who's been covering the Mondale campaign for us, is joining us now live from Minneapolis this morning. Betsy, if Walter Mondale loses this campaign, as all polls indicate that's a very good possibility this morning, how does he want his campaign to look in the history books?
Kathleen, I think the most important thing to Walter Mondale is that he raised some issues. He wants to make sure that he moved this country in the direction that he feels is important. The two areas that most interest him, arms control, social legislation. He got President Reagan to sit down with Andre Gromyko, and on the social areas, he got the president to promise that he would not touch Social Security, and that's what a large segment of this population was worried about. So he has accomplished something.
Steve?
Thank you very much, Betsy Aaron in Minnesota. Geraldine Ferraro completed a 4-state northern swing with a sentimental return to her alma mater in Manhattan. At Marymount College, Ferraro thanked her mother and family for their support, and she told the crowd that she's convinced she and Walter Mondale will win today. Vice President Bush wrapped up his campaign barnstorming across his adopted state of Texas. In Houston, Bush urged voters to support President Reagan, not only by voting for him, but by also electing a Republican Congress to support the president's program. The returns already are in from Dixville Notch, New Hampshire. Tradition again. Voters there have given President Reagan nearly unanimous support. As we said, it's a tradition for the voters in Dixville Notch to cast their ballots at midnight. This time it was 29 for Mr. Reagan, just 1 for Walter Mondale. ABC News President Roone Arledge has announced that ABC News will not use exit polls to suggest winners in any state until the polls in that state have closed. ABC News will provide live coverage of the election, of course, beginning at 7 Eastern Time tonight with Peter Jennings and David Brinkley.
CBS News coverage of Campaign 84 election night continues. And now from CBS News election headquarters in New York, here again is Dan Rather.
CBS News estimates that Ronald Reagan has been re-elected president. The question remains, how big a mandate is he likely to get? Welcome back to our election coverage. The polls have just closed in 16 states, with a total of 195 electoral votes in these states alone. On the basis of the results in those states and on interviews with voters as they left the polling places, CBS News now estimates that Ronald Reagan has been re-elected president of our United States. Until this hour, it takes 270 electoral votes to win. Ronald Reagan already has, as you saw on that, we estimate about 280. Now, up until this hour, President Reagan had all the states in red that you see here, 136 electoral votes. This is before we started counting these new votes in from the Midwest and from the South. This is how it looked before the polls closed in many states at this hour. Now, after the polls closed in the states at 8 o'clock, the electoral count began to grow. And of the states reporting this hour, of the 16 more states, Ronald Reagan has won 12 of these new states, putting his electoral vote total over the top with 280. Walter Mondale at this hour won 1, the District of Columbia. Mondale has yet to win a state, but as expected, we estimate that he has carried the District of Columbia, which gives Mondale 3 electoral votes. This is the way the map looks now. Virtually all red. Ronald Reagan, 280 electoral votes, at least we estimate he has now. Walter Mondale gets 3 in the District of Columbia. It's still alive and working. The District of Columbia blinking up there in the right-hand corner of your screen. Since the district is so small, we have to put it on a little blink there so you can see it. Ronald Reagan still has a chance for an historic 50-state sweep. Let's look where his new electoral votes come from, if you will. First of all, in New Jersey, the Garden State with 16 electoral votes, where Geraldine Ferraro, it had been hoped by Walter Mondale, might make a difference. Not so. Ronald Reagan carries New Jersey. In Illinois, the Prairie State, with 24 big electoral votes, Ronald Reagan has buried Walter Mondale in Illinois. In Michigan, the Wolverine State, with 20 electoral votes. On the basis of our interviews with voters as they left the polls, our CBS News exit poll indicates Ronald Reagan has also carried Michigan. In Texas, 29 electoral votes in Texas, one of the mega electoral states of the South and Southwest. Ronald Reagan rolls on to victory in Texas as well. In Connecticut, the Nutmeg State with 8 electoral votes. It goes to Ronald Reagan, as does the state of Maine. Maine with 4 electoral votes is carried by Ronald Reagan as expected. Delaware, a state that has voted with the winner in the last 8 straight presidential elections, only 3 electoral votes in the first state. Delaware also drops into the Reagan column. Only 3 electoral votes in the first state. Delaware also drops into the Reagan column. Tennessee, the volunteer state, 11 electoral votes. Ronald Reagan rolls over Walter Mondale in Tennessee as well. Oklahoma, the Sooner state, 8 electoral votes there. Ronald Reagan has beaten Walter Mondale in Oklahoma as well. Kansas, the Sunflower State and one of the most Republican states in the Union, Ronald Reagan wins its 7 electoral votes. Missouri, the Show Me State, a border state where Walter Mondale thought he just might have a chance. 11 electoral votes at stake. Ronald Reagan wins those 11 electoral votes. North Dakota, the Sioux State, 3 electoral votes. Ronald Reagan, as expected, wins it. And in the District of Columbia, which was widely expected to go for Walter Mondale, it has gone for Mondale, and so Mondale gets on the board with 3 electoral votes from the District of Columbia. This is the way the map looks now. Southern states, Midwestern states are now moving on out into the Midwest, even the upper Midwest now. Every state that has reported thus far has gone to Ronald Reagan. Only the District of Columbia, with its 3 electoral votes, has gone to Mondale. Reagan, we estimate now, has at least 280 electoral votes. Remember, it takes 270 electoral votes to win. Walter Mondale has 3. In terms of the national vote, actual votes in and tabulated, 3% of the precincts reporting Reagan leads Mondale 62% to 38%. The Reagan tally is 1,730,000 votes. Mondale with just over 1 million votes. But remember, there are 538 electoral votes, and in the Electoral College is where it counts. Reagan is over the top with 280 of those electoral votes, we estimate. Now, Bruce Morton, not a surprising result, but how did the president fashion this victory?
Well, not surprising, Dan, maybe a little bigger than people thought. Of course, you could make the argument all he really needed to do was win Delaware. Delaware is never wrong. It's always with the winner. And Ed Rollins, the manager of the Reagan-Bush campaign, said at one point, listen, we just go and spread a couple of $1 million around Delaware. There's no way we can lose this thing. Seriously, it's... I'd kind of like to turn that around a little and talk about what Walter Mondale tried to do. Mr. Reagan ran on peace and prosperity, and that's usually a winner. This is clearly a landslide. We don't yet quite know its geographic limits, but it'll be astonishing if the West turns around. That's been bedrock Republican territory for some elections past now. But we might take a look, based on our CBS News New York Times exit poll, at some of the groups Walter Mondale thought he might be able to get to come his way. First, young people. In fact, today, according to our poll, young people voted for the Reagan-Bush ticket. The Democrats had hoped that, as youth has in the past, it would vote Democratic this time. They hope that a lot of the younger, the upwardly mobile professionals, yumpies in that word we all heard so often this year, would object to the Jerry Falwell kind of conservatism, rules about abortion and school prayer and all that. In fact, about a quarter of Gary Hart's voters in the Democratic primaries voted for Ronald Reagan today. The Democrats have historically had the older voters worried about Medicare and Social Security. Mr. Mondale tried to make those issues, but those people went today for Ronald Reagan. Farmers, another group that once upon a time in Franklin Roosevelt's day used to vote pretty solidly Democratic, they today were for the Reagan-Bush ticket. Women, sick transit Gloria gender gap, I suppose, women voted Republican today. And Italian Americans, it was thought that if Geraldine Ferraro were a help anywhere, she would be a help with Catholics and Italian Americans. That didn't work either. As far as issues are concerned, Mr. Mondale spent a lot of his time talking about the deficit and the need to raise taxes to bring it down. Voters today said they didn't want to raise taxes to bring it down. They were on Mr. Reagan's side of that argument, and they also gave him credit as a strong leader. So you could argue, Dan, that the Mondale campaign tried to do 2 or 3 particular things. They thought they'd get credit for boldness by coming out in favor of raising taxes. That backfired. They thought that picking a woman for vice president, a truly bold stroke, might help them. It apparently didn't. They pinned a lot of faith on the debates, and people in our poll today just said the debates didn't make very much difference with them one way or the other. So the Mondale campaign took some gambles and lost.
Lost all of them except in the District of Columbia from the states reporting thus far, which reminds me, Bruce, and I know that you and I were just talking about this, that there's still a great deal at stake in those states where the polls are still open. When we encourage people to go out there and vote, it is a case that there's still a lot at stake. First of all, there is the question of how big a victory this is going to be. Ronald Reagan, his hopes for an unprecedented 50-state sweep, those hopes still alive and working. That's one big question, how big the win? The other big question, how long, how powerful will the Reagan coattails be? He's got an avalanche going. Now, is he going to be able to pull in the wake of that avalanche some additional Republican senators in? The Republicans have control of the Senate. Is he going to be able to pull in an ideological majority in the House of Representatives? Now, that's where those states where the polls are still open in the Midwest and West can still make a tremendous difference.
CBS News coverage of Campaign 84 Election Night continues. From CBS News Election Headquarters in New York, here again is Dan Rather.
And good evening again. If today were a fish, Walter Mondale would throw it back in because the polls have closed in 41 states total. And in all 32 of them decided by this hour, all have gone to Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, red on the map, Walter Mondale in blue. 352 electoral votes Ronald Reagan has, at least at this hour. CBS News estimates Ronald Reagan has 352. Walter Mondale has picked up only the District of Columbia. You see it blinking there at one point up in the right-hand part of your screen. Reagan 352, Mondale 3, with 270 electoral votes needed to win. Now, the questions, however, the questions that may very well be decided by the votes out here in the western portion of the country in states, the Dakotas, Idaho, Utah, California, Hawaii, Alaska, Washington, Oregon. What may be decided out there is how big a mandate Ronald Reagan gets and whether indeed he gets a 50-state sweep. 26 votes in the House of Representatives, that's the magic number. Ronald Reagan would love to change the makeup of the House by 26 more Republican members or not. He gets that. He figures he'd have a working majority in the House. That may be decided by the votes that are still out in the western states. Very important votes. Every vote out there counts and matters a lot in the presidential race, in addition to all the others, because it may very well decide what kind of mandate and the size of the mandate that Ronald Reagan gets. Now, 3 more states have just dropped in to the Reagan column. Let's look them over. In Vermont, the Green Mountain State, which traditionally goes Republican, it has gone Republican. Ronald Reagan wins Vermont. Wisconsin, the Badger State, with 11 electoral votes and some of the best dairy cattle anywhere on the planet. Ronald Reagan wins it. None of the dairy cattle voted for him, but apparently a lot of other people did. A Reagan sweep in Wisconsin. And in New York. Read it and weep if you're a Democrat. 36 electoral votes, a state where Governor Mario Cuomo was trying to do it for Walter Mondale. Mayor Ed Koch in New York was trying to do it for him. Geraldine Ferraro, Congresswoman from New York, was put on the ticket with hopes of holding New York for the Democrats. Ronald Reagan blows it all apart and carries the state of New York. Now, this is the way the national vote looks at this hour. A number of the votes are in and tabulated. The thousands are beginning to mount up now. 19% of the precincts reporting nationwide. Ronald Reagan leads Walter Mondale in these actually counted ballots, 60% to 40%. Reagan with just over 10.5 million votes among those counted thus far. Mondale with just over 7 million votes. Now, what we may be seeing here, and let's put the context to this, is Ronald Reagan becoming a kind of Babe Ruth of politics. The old Democratic coalition is gone, out of here. Ronald Reagan carries through the Solid South, through the Midwest, the old Rust Belt where the unions used to be strong. Ronald Reagan carrying state after state in there. Now, we may be seeing an avalanche of historic proportions. The question, can Ronald Reagan carry 50 states, still very much up for grabs. So far, Ronald Reagan has only carried the District of Columbia. Ronald Reagan started the night with a Republican majority of 55 to 45 in the House of, in the Senate. The Democrats have picked up 1 in Tennessee, Albert Gore. And now the question becomes, does the Senate stay Republican? Looks like it probably will. And does Ronald Reagan get a working majority in the House? Well, that brings us to Jesse Jackson. Democrat who was a candidate for president during the primary campaign. And Jesse Jackson is with us this evening for an interview. Good evening, Reverend Jackson.
Good evening.
It is not a very good evening for the Democrats. And among other things, in virtually every state, working-class whites have abandoned Walter Mondale. Are you one of the reasons they've done so?
Well, of course not. The fact is, this trend has been going on now for 20 years. It did not start this year. And there's a great body of poverty and pain amongst white people that's not been adequately addressed. Reagan somehow appealed to the white male macho and sense of security, whereas we obviously must address it more directly. The record-breaking black vote this time around is the reason why Heflin won in Alabama. He only got 44% of the white vote. The black vote got him over. It's the reason why Gore won in Tennessee. It's the reason why Hunter's put up a fairly good race in North Carolina. So we must build upon this record-breaking black vote. And blacks and whites in this country have converging economic interests. The fact is, in every poverty-stricken category, it's more white than black and brown and more female than male. We must step in that gap and give people a sense of hope and not just allow them to settle for prayer clause and flags.
Reverend Jackson, if a Democrat someone who really wanted Walter Mondale would come up to you and say, Reverend Jackson, after all is said and done, what happened with you is more was said than done, that you didn't really turn out the black votes that you said that you could turn out, particularly in the South. How would you answer him?
It's not true. The fact of the matter is, the black vote is the largest and most consistent and loyal block of Democratic votes. Women said, in effect, if you do not put a woman on the ticket, we will, in fact, not support the ticket. A woman was on the ticket. They did not, in fact, support the ticket. The other members of the Democratic family, the women, the workers and labor, the Hispanics, the Jews, and the youth, in fact, stick with the Democratic coalition. We can win. We lost terribly in 1972. We bounced back by 1976. We have reason to know that much of Reagan's perception strength is going to give way to reality in just a matter of months. Tomorrow morning we should wake up, smile through our tears, start organizing for 86 and for 88.
Reverend Jackson, I want to approach this question with some sensitivity, and I know you want to answer it with some sensitivity, but on the other hand, let's talk straight, as you always try to do. Does the result of today's election indicate a widening white-black split in this country?
Well, I do not think so. I think that blacks simply voted their best interest. Many whites did not vote their interests. After all, when you have 90,000 corporations making a profit and paying no taxes, people making 2,000 below poverty paying taxes, that's not black-white. When one looks at 8 million more people in poverty 4 years later, with cheese and butter lines longer without meat and bread, that's not white-black. There are some other more basic problems that we must address. Among others, there are 10 million people unemployed, 12 million working part-time, and we did not tackle the jobs issues head-on. That must be addressed. But I think we must say that Fritz Mondale and Geraldine Ferraro ran a highly spirited campaign, one with great character and great integrity, and we simply must face the fact that we are now the down part of a cycle, wake up tomorrow morning moving toward regrouping, broadening the base of our party, and showing evidence of our strength in 86, moving on toward 88.
Thank you very much, Reverend Jesse Jackson. Thanks for being with us. Our CBS News coverage of Ronald Reagan's re-election will continue in a moment.
Now, Tim Taylor, Denise DeCenzo, John Telich on sports, and Dick Goddard with weather. This is News Center 8.
Good evening, everyone.
Thanks for joining us. Here's what's happening. The figures tell the story of this landslide victory for President Ronald Reagan. Looking at this hour like he'll win all 50 states. No president has ever gained such a mandate from the people. In California, the president refused to acknowledge the historic tidal wave, saying only that he was cautiously optimistic. From the Rust Belt to the Sun Belt, every Democratic-held stronghold fell to the Republicans tonight.
And the state that handed Senator Gary Hart a Democratic primary victory, Ohio, has handed a resounding victory to President Reagan. But look at Cuyahoga County going for Mondale, obviously clinging to its Democratic tradition despite the Reagan landslide.
We'll have that in just a moment. Just a few minutes ago, Vice President Walter Mondale conceded this election to President Reagan, and he had to be the hardest speech that he's ever had to make.
Again tonight, the American people in town halls, in homes, in firehouses, in libraries, chose the occupant of the most powerful office on earth. Their choice was made peacefully, with dignity, and with majesty. And although I would have rather won, tonight we rejoice in our democracy. We rejoice in the freedom of a wonderful people, and we accept their verdict.
Right now, through the numbers as we have them at this hour, the electoral vote, 270 required. I've said that all night long. Look at what Ronald Reagan has, 522 electoral votes, just 3 for Walter Mondale. In the national race now, that is the popular vote, nearly 3/4 of the precincts have checked in. The Reagan-Bush lead remains at 18 points over Mondale and Ferraro. Tonight in
5:30.
We're back. It's now 1:30 in the morning. It is the day after the election of Ronald Reagan to a second term as President of the United States. There are still a couple of very important and very close races outstanding. One in the United States Senate. Roger Mudd is now prepared to project a winner in it in Illinois. Roger?
In Illinois, it is the Democrat Paul Simon.
We're going to project the state of Minnesota. Here it is. 62% of the vote in Minnesota. There it is. We can't project it. We're just going to show you what the final numbers are in Minnesota. 2/3. It looks like it's going to be very close all night long. We don't know whether Walter Mondale can win his own home state. We can now, I am told that we can, in fact, project Walter Mondale, the winner of the state of Minnesota. That is his home state. That is the single state that he will win tonight. It has 10 electoral votes. It is his home and his headquarters. It is the taproot of his whole political philosophy. Minnesota, colored red tonight. For Walter Mondale, he can claim his pride in his native state and in his neighbors and the people who sent him to Washington as a senator and elected him attorney general as well. And from that, he can claim some victory. So here's the Electoral College total one more time tonight. 13 for Walter Mondale, 525 for President Reagan. And the national vote, as we now have it, 77% of the vote is in. An 18-point lead for President Reagan and George Bush over Walter Mondale and Geraldine Ferraro. A landslide of really sizable proportions for the Republican ticket tonight. And we'll only know what is going to happen when they begin to confront this new Congress. 17 seats that the Republicans picked up. 2 seats for the Democrats in the Senate. Well, I'm going to sound a little bit like a candidate here. This has been a long evening for all of us. We hope that you have learned and understood how the election turned out and why it turned out that way. But let me say to all of the people that you couldn't see speaking to you, who are behind the scenes here, we couldn't have done it without them. And to them, we are eternally grateful. And for all of you who joined us, we're grateful as well. You can tune in tomorrow morning at NBC News at sunrise and the Today Show tomorrow night on NBC Nightly News and hear more. And we hope that you will. For now, on behalf of all of us at NBC News, I'm Tom Brokaw. Good night and good morning.
This is CNN Headline News. You're in tune with the world.
A triumphant Reagan, a gracious Mondale. Hello, I'm Jane Agri. A jubilant President Reagan today is savoring a re-election mandate of near-record proportions. Mr. Reagan came just shy of the 50-state sweep his advisors had sought. Only Walter Mondale's home state of Minnesota and the District of Columbia backed the defeated Democrat. A victorious Reagan said that his landslide win meant completion of an unfinished agenda. For Mondale, it meant the end of a hard 22-month campaign.
He has won. We are all Americans. He is our president, and we honor him tonight.
We've come together again. We're united again. And now let's start building together and keep that prairie fire alive. And let's never stop shaping that society which lets each person's dreams unfold into a life of unending hope. America's best days lie ahead.
Geraldine Ferraro was not shedding any tears as she watched election returns from a New York hotel, even though her home state, traditionally a Democratic stronghold, was also swept in by the Reagan tidal wave. Instead, Ferraro dwelled on the historical significance of her role in the presidential campaign, a role that opponent George Bush also gave credit to.
And even though he did not win this race for the presidency, in 1984 he waged another battle. A battle for equal opportunity, and that battle Walter Mondale won.
A little while ago, I had a most gracious phone call from Geraldine Ferraro. She campaigned hard. She was a strong opponent. No, she worked very, very hard. A strong opponent, Barbara and I both talked to her and thanked her and sent our best wishes to her and to her family.
My children. Wednesday at 8.
My loss tonight does not in any way diminish the worth or the importance of our struggle.
Thank you. I think that's just been arranged.
In the top of the news this morning, American voters have made their choice, and it will indeed be 4 more years for Ronald Reagan.
But President Reagan's coattails were not long enough for Republicans to make major inroads in the House. And this morning, the Space Shuttle Discovery is beginning a mission that will test whether it can truly function as an orbiting salvage vehicle.
From ABC News, this is World News This Morning for Wednesday, November 7th, 1984. It's 6 a.m. Now from ABC News Election Headquarters in New York, Steve Bell and Kathleen Sullivan.
Good morning, everyone. They're calling this one a landslide. Voters have proven the polls were right, returning Ronald Reagan to the White House for another 4 years. The latest figures show President Reagan winning 59% of the popular vote to 41% for Walter Mondale. Mr. Reagan also captured 525 electoral votes, the most ever, to just 13 for the challenger. We have 2 reports. First, Rita Flynn.
That familiar chant heard throughout the campaign prompted Ronald Reagan's first words of acceptance.
I think that's just been arranged.
Mr. Reagan moved to heal the wounds of a bitter political fight when he told of the talk he'd had only minutes before with the man to whom he'd handed such a stunning defeat.
Just a short time ago, Walter Mondale phoned me. He told me that we were all Americans. We'd go forward together.
And though he managed to win without ever having to be specific about his plans for a second term, the president sought to keep the fires burning with slogans that spoke of the future.
Tonight is the end of nothing. It's the beginning of everything.
From here, the president heads next to his ranch outside Santa Barbara, where he's to spend the rest of the week relaxing as his aides begin to think hard about what's to be done with this mandate, a mandate so convincing that some of his advisors are already saying it amounts to a blank check. Rita Flynn, ABC News, Los Angeles.
This is Betsy Aaron. They hoped for the miracle which never came, supporters watching for any good news, staffers consoling each other. And finally, with the polls closed, Walter Mondale joined them.
He has won. We are all Americans. He is our president, and we honor him tonight.
There were no boos, no blame, no recriminations from the gracious candidate.
And although I would have rather won, tonight we rejoice in our democracy and we accept their verdict.
He'd wanted to win for the poor and the homeless and the helpless, encouraging his young supporters to continue the fight. In the end, no one here would call this man a loser.
And I'm at peace with the knowledge that I gave it everything I've got.
There were some who said all along that Walter Mondale didn't stand a chance. There were many who criticized his campaign. The size of the loss could satisfy both arguments. But by choosing a woman to share his presidential ticket, this cautious compromiser had changed the face of American politics. No small accomplishment. Betsy Aaron, ABC News, with the Mondale campaign in St. Paul.
The race for vice president was sometimes marked by bitter rhetoric on both sides, but last night both Geraldine Ferraro and Vice President George Bush took the high road as they came to the end of the campaign trail.
Tonight, the campaign ends. The race is over. This is not a moment for partisan statements. It is a moment to celebrate our democracy and to think of our country.
Let's come together as one people, united and indivisible, to share a common purpose, to realize the dream held by all Americans, regardless of party, the universal goal of peace and prosperity and opportunity for all.
While losing the race for the White House, Democrats appear pleased with the election results at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington. Among their victories, Democratic Congressman Paul Simon unseated three-term Senator Charles Percy of Illinois.
At the very end of the campaign, Mondale predicted he would win. But the day after the election, he told a different story.
After the first debate, I thought we had a chance and things moved again, but then it moved right back to that other level. I would say that my chances of winning probably disappeared at the end of the second debate. My feeling was that if we'd had the same kind of verdict, which I doubted we'd have in the second debate, that I then had a chance to win. But the president did sufficiently well in the second debate that I think it reassured Americans, and they did what I think they were planning to do all along. Modern politics today requires mastery of television. I think, I've never really warmed up to television. And in fairness to television, it's never really warmed up to me. And I, by instinct and tradition, I never like, I don't like these things, as a matter of fact.
We may have to figure out how to get our candidates to do a little bit better on television.
I don't believe it's possible anymore to run for president without the capacity to build confidence and communications every night.
And what will the president do with his victory?
These are things that have to do with not going along with the idea that the only way you can cut spending is to eliminate or reduce some program. What we're talking about is being able to do things government is supposed to do, but doing it more efficiently and economically. And there's evidence of that. We've made a number of steps that have revealed that the government is still larded with a lot of fat and still doing things in an old-fashioned way that business gave up a long time ago. So we're going to do things of that kind.
Reagan's victory was so pervasive that he even captured the home congressional district.